Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of DarshanTalks. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. As you know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you have an interest in FDA-regulated companies or their products, this is the podcast for you. So today's podcast is one I've been actually excited about for a few days, well, a few weeks at this point. But I managed to talk to the person we're going to talk about. And we've always discussed promotions and promotional compliance in a way that is really from a pharma-centric viewpoint. And I think the world's evolving, the world's changing. So if you are marketing in a pharma company or a medical device company or biopharmaceutical company, if you are in sales, if you're in medical affairs, you probably want to care about the conversation we're having today, because it may land up changing how you focus your efforts and who you focus them towards, i.e., hopefully focus them towards the needs of the patient. So our guest for today worked in New York City in various senior level positions at large medical advertising agencies. She went to an early stage startup, a little known startup that most people haven't heard of, called Hippocrates. And for me, it sort of brings a lot of fond memories, because I remember being straight out of, well, actually still in pharmacy school, and having a Palm Pilot and getting Hippocrates. And she worked in Hippocrates, where she worked with a variety of healthcare stakeholders on digital marketing to providers. And she's coming out of from both the science perspective and from an understanding of how digital marketing works. So our guest for today, the CEO of RX Balance, Lydia Green. Hey, Lydia, how are you?
Hi, Darshan.
It's good to see you. Good to have you on here. Let's start from the beginning, because it's not a question I get to ask, well, anyone really so far. How did you even get involved in Hippocrates? Like, that seems to have been, for me, it was a mind-blowing thing as a user. So what was it like being the one producing it or working to produce it?
It was an extraordinary experience. So what happened is I was working at a small medical device advertising agency in New York City, in California, in Palo Alto. And I read an article in the San Francisco Chronicle about Hippocrates, and I was very intrigued, and I sent my resume in and was very sad because I never heard back. And I was about to take a job as a creative director at a San Francisco ad agency. And I said, I'm going to call Hippocrates one time. And I called the HR director, and he said, we didn't get your resume. Our servers crashed one day, and it was probably lost. So I sent it in. They got back to me. And after a grueling day of interviews, I got a job. And my first job there was director of corporate and marketing communications.
So you went from, I know nothing about Hippocrates, so I'm going to try this, and you became one of the first employees.
Yes.
And tell me a little bit about what your job looked like then. Because I feel like, based on the conversations we've sort of hinted at, it was germane to what is now RX Balance. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what your start was, what your job was, and how it became your journey to RX Balance.
So when I was at Hippocrates, digital healthcare was very new. Hippocrates was probably the first mobile healthcare app. So my first job was working with a public relations firm that was trying to raise awareness of what the company did. But if you recall, we lost that PR agency. I think it was in the spring of 2001. There was a market crash. So then I was thrust into being the only person who was supposed to promote the company. And I sort of learned on the job. And at that point, technology reporters were interested in what we were doing, but people did not understand mobile healthcare. And they thought that, for example, an app was an email on a BlackBerry. So I worked with I worked with and reached out to reporters at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. I did not know what I was doing, but I had one thing going for me. I was passionate about the company and the company's mission. And I really talked a lot to reporters about how Hippocrates could improve patient safety. And people were interested, and we got great public relations coverage in top tier newspapers. And it's funny because I remember going to John Voris, who was the CEO, because I had gotten so much good coverage. He said, okay, for your treat, I'm going to send you to a PR conference. And it had, like 1,000 people. And one of the speakers said, whoops, sorry about that.
Okay.
One of the speakers said, how many people have had their company covered in a top tier newspaper? And so I raised my hand, and there were quite a few people who raised their hand. And then he said, how many people have had it covered in 2 top tier newspapers? And I was one of the only people who raised my hand. But once again, what I learned at Hippocrates is passion about a mission will drive an idea. And that if you have an idea that really improves patient care or improves some societal problem, that it's a big advantage. And that was also my enthusiasm about being at Hippocrates. I had never worked at a company with a social mission.
So what was the social mission of Hippocrates?
The social mission was to improve patient care by giving providers access to drug information at the point of care. And what was so intriguing is at that time, we were criticized. It's impossible. No physician will ever look at their BlackBerry or Palm Pilot in front of a patient because the doctor is an authority figure. He should know all this information. But then it turned out that just wasn't true. So the naysayers were wrong. Not only did doctors prefer that than having to go to a back room and look into a PDR, but patients felt confident. It didn't make them question their doctors. It made them feel more confident that their doctor knew the appropriate dose. They knew if there were any drug side effects, and they knew if there were drug interactions.
Which I think is really important. I think we're now reaching that point of knowledge where we've got to the just-in-time knowledge, for lack of a better term. I don't even know if I should probably trademark this or something, but the idea that I need the knowledge I need at the time I need it. And in many ways, you were part of the mission of bringing that to reality, where you don't need all these random trivia all the time. You just need the one answer you need to solve for that moment. And that's what Hippocrates was solving.
Right. And what's interesting is that at the time when I took the job at Hippocrates, I was also offered a job at an electronic prescribing company.
Okay.
And I told them, I don't think this is the right job for me, because at that point, electronic prescribing was in its inception, but there were so many, we're talking about 2000, there were so many barricades. One was that the companies that did electronic prescribing were going to have to go out to the individual state pharmacy boards and get approval for this. And to me, it seemed impossible to do that in 2000. Now it's been done, but it's now 2020. So the thing I liked about Hippocrates was the simplicity of the solution. It was so simple, but yet we were criticized for that because, healthcare tends to attract these billion-dollar solutions that are impossible to implement. And what was so great about Hippocrates is all it meant was that a doctor needed a Palm Pilot. And what's interesting is the original business model was going to get pharmaceutical companies to buy Palm Pilots for doctors. And Hippocrates was shipping the Palm Pilot with the software to doctors. And soon after that, one of our pharmaceutical clients, an early pharmaceutical client, said, I don't need to buy this for doctors. They're going to buy it themselves. And that's when we stopped production and just focused on providing software.
That's fascinating. I was part of that journey as a user where I
Uh-huh.
saw. I remember buying my own Palm Pilot and being thinking I was so cool. But I guess my question is now, what is the mission for RX Balance compared? Well, for RX Balance, let's ask that question first.
So RX Balance is a relatively simple solution to both to several things that I observed in my career. So when I was at Hippocrates, I worked with a lot of health systems and I worked with pharmacists. I worked with academic faculty. And what I noticed is they were so frustrated about how doctors prescribe. And I had many clients who would say to me, why did doctors do what they do? And I noticed this is interesting because none of my pharmaceutical clients even ever asked that question. I never even, their whole attitude is we need doctors to do this and they will do this because we will shape what they do. So I noticed that dichotomy and I started thinking, well, could you apply pharmaceutical marketing communication strategies to improving patient health? And I'm not saying that drug companies are not improving patient health. And in my TEDx talk, I do talk about companies having the right to earn profits and the right to market their products. However, over the course of my career, I noticed that drug companies got much more involved in disease education and that they were actually not just marketing their drugs, they were shaping how doctors practiced. And one example that we're all familiar with is what happened with opioids. Because when I worked in advertising, opioids were restricted to oncologists using it for chronic cancer pain. But as more opioids started hitting the market, the companies started expanding the number of treatable patients by encouraging doctors to provide opioids for people with migraines, people after dental extractions. So the simple solution, and yet the power of my pharmaceutical clients, because ever since I've been a young person starting out in advertising, I was super impressed by the amount of money that my clients spent on communications. And it was a wonderful career as a pharmacist. I'm a pharmacist and medical writer because my clients there were no restrictions on the number of hours that I would spend creating content because there were endless resources. But I realized that the health systems and the payers didn't have those kind of resources, and that communications with providers was sort of an afterthought. Like, for example, if you look right now at Medicaid claims processing, which are done by these huge consulting companies, the state Medicaid offices hiring those companies do expect those companies to do some provider education, but it's an afterthought. Where I felt like, don't you understand how influential communications can be? Don't you realize that you could be solving these overutilization, underutilization challenges just by communicating concisely in an engaging and powerful way? And I was trained to do that. So eventually I realized this is what I have to offer people, or offer to improve healthcare, that I have had this amazing apprenticeship and training, and that it would be valuable for public health. But there were barriers to accomplishing that I started to break down at the end of my career at Hippocrates, including the fact I didn't know anybody other than anyone in the pharmaceutical industry. And I needed to meet, medical school faculty who were on the cutting edge of this topic.
So there's so many topics to break down there. So let me start with a couple. The part that really jumped out at me is there's a mandate for payers, or technically the consultants to the payers like Medicare and Medicaid, to actually engage in teaching and educating physicians and prescribers. My first question is, you talked about doing that using education. I had another guest recently, Susan Kirkendale, and she actually talked about using nudging behavior, if you will. So using behavioral health, the word's not tricks, recommendations, if you will, to go towards a desired behavior. I guess my question to you is, first of all, what is the desired behavior? Is it appropriate utilization, or is it education? What is it that RX Balance says is the desired behavior? And then how does RX Balance get there? And what is the mission statement that you're trying to solve through that, I guess is the question I'm asking.
Okay, well, I'm going to use a concrete example.
Okay.
Because I'm concrete. So about 2 years ago, a group of us had a private dinner at the American Diabetes Association. I think it was 2019, the year before COVID. And the group who attended was several VA physicians, someone from the VA who actually is in charge of national diabetes education, and faculty from UC Davis and Stanford. There were also some VA physicians from Ohio. And we got together to talk about an area that we had all identified as a problem area. And that is the fact that adults over 75 with diabetes type 2 and people who have chronic comorbidities were being overtreated. And the benefit risk ratio was this: the risk of hypoglycemia in these patients was greater than the benefit for many of them of treatment. And yet, if you look at the research, many of these patients are being treated to a A1C of 7%. In fact, I saw a study recently that 17% of these patients are being treated to an A1C of 6.5. So the VA in particular has tried to advocate for higher A1C levels for years, but no one's been able to do it. And partly is because the number 7% is entrenched in patients' mind, health systems' minds, and providers' minds. I know that because I work for all the drug companies that promoted 7% back around 2000. So what happens is you have a subpopulation of people who are being overtreated, and the long form text and the newsletters and the provider emails about this population and how you should treat them to a higher A1C somehow has had no impact. So people got together and said, why is this happening? And what can we do in terms of communication that would improve it? And we did talk about nudging. There was somebody at Harvard who talked about, using electronic health record alerts. But after that meeting, I approached two of the VA physicians in Ohio and said, would you like the opportunity to work with pharmaceutical ad writers, super accomplished ones, to try to put together a different type of communication to address this issue? And I can remember one of them saying, well, as long as it's fun, we'll do it, because they were just curious and they got hooked. And those two doctors have put in so many hours of stealth time to creating content. And what we did is we took the pharmaceutical advertising work process that we used to create content for drug companies, and we used it to create our hypoglycemia provider education, which also has a patient component. But to do this at an affordable price point requires a lot of experiment and a lot of cutting corners. And that's what I think working at a startup helped me with, because at my startup that I worked at, Hippocrates, I was taught the 80-20 rule from the very beginning. How do you get 80% of the results with 20% of the effort, but yet maintain quality? So my board of directors are also pharmaceutical ad writers. So over the last year and a half, as we've created this content, tested the content, refined the content, we have learned how to do that. And, you know, RX Balance up till now has been self-funded. I'm very fortunate. I have a retired pharmaceutical ad executive who had a very successful ad agency, who supports us financially with a monthly stipend. We are a nonprofit, so it's good for him too. He's retired. But he's disgusted with pharmaceutical advertising. And of course, he will talk about the heyday of pharmaceutical advertising, because Darshan, pharmaceutical advertising did change in the mid 1990s. And it really did go from being more about marketing product benefits and features to shaping how doctors practice medicine. It was a distinct change. I noticed it.
I love it. So what is the impact of addressing what I hear you saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the way medicine is currently impacted is that you're changing the fundamental structure of what's being addressed. So, for example, the HbA1c level, or let's say it was.
It could be overuse of inhaled corticosteroids in COPD. Right.
Sure.
It's all population health across any chronic disease. This is just where we started our pilot.
Right.
We already had a group of respected interdisciplinary folks who are concerned about this area.
So what can you do about it? I mean, you've identified a problem. So what's the solution?
We're using pharmaceutical advertising strategy, which is you see, a lot of people think the pharmaceutical ad agency and marketing departments are so successful because they have tons of money. And they do. I mean, I've been at meetings where somebody, you know, had $1 million idea on a paper napkin, and it was like, okay, fine, we'll finance it. We don't have that kind of money, but we can be smart, and instead of demonizing industry, use what we've learned from them. They know how to create strategic strategy, which is you drill down on the problem and the challenge. You look at social norms, attitudes, behaviors, perceptions. You look at barriers, and then you come up with concise, single-focused message to address the issue, perhaps supported by 3 evidence points. That process is very, very difficult. And the pharmaceutical industry is smart, and they hire really smart people to do that for them. But the people I work with at health systems or doctors, they're used to, you know, the first idea that pops into your head, and then we'll write a 5-page newsletter and we'll send it to doctors. That's their approach. So we're showing them, let us show you. And I can tell you, the doctors we work with at the VA are our best advocates. So through our VA doctors, we now have a quality improvement organization in Ohio. It's made up of payers and providers and Medicaid, and they're interested in using our hypoglycemia provider education content. We also have these doctors at the VA who are now introducing us to other VA sites that they think might be interested in testing our concept, because I have self-funded RX Balance. So I pay writers, art directors, designers. We tested our content with physicians through Medscape. And Medscape was a wonderful partner for us because I worked with a lot of people at Medscape Market Research, worked at Hippocrates. But now we're facing the next barrier, which is we need to prove to payers that this content can impact what doctors do. And we're getting proposals in for the cost, and it's a heck of a lot more expensive. I mean, I could not self-fund this. So we're looking at questionnaires, doing questionnaires. But what we really want to do is something organic where we run the ads on provider websites, and then a week later go back to the doctors who had those ads displayed and test what they recall. But it ain't cheap, which is once again where we're going to, for the first time, start looking for outside funding.
So is it fair to say that you are using the same information that that pharma companies and medical device companies use, but you're coming at it from a science perspective, and not suggesting that they don't, but saying that you have a stronger science bend while they have a stronger information, sort of easy to digest information bend, how would you distinguish yourself?
Okay. So yes. A pharmaceutical company and a medical device company has an objective in mind, which is increasing market share and whatever is involved with that. So their medical affairs or medical communications and their marketing department, of course, is very restricted on what they can say, but that is their objective. Our objective is to publicize science that no one is publicizing because it's not making anyone money. And I'll give you an example with hypoglycemia. If you look at the American Diabetes Association guidelines, they definitely address the patient population I am describing. It's part of perhaps a 40-page guideline. And section 6.8, I'm just making this up, addresses this in 2 or 3 paragraphs, not particularly well written in that it's, medical content tends to be obtuse, dense, whatever. So we're just pulling out a piece of content and science that is well established. There's consensus. I would say that it's agreed upon. It's not controversial. It's not uncertain science, but nobody is promoting it because why would anyone really promote it? Because a drug company that makes drugs for hyperglycemic patients, their focus is pushing this 7% number for healthy adults. And I want to be really clear. RxBalance and our co-advisors support 7% for healthy patients. But that number is now stuck in everyone's mind so that when the 85-year-old is going to the doctor, they want 7%. They want a 7% A1C too. And in fact, there are doctors who might try to change an A1C goal, and the patient says, you're withholding medical care from me.
Right.
So we're going to focus on those areas. So I don't think, I do believe pharmaceutical marketing has contributed to the problem. So for example, I'm going to use opioids because it's so easy of an example. Right now, things are really changing. And there is now money going to try to address issues like use of opioids post-surgically, use of opioids post-extraction in dentist's office. But, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, everybody who was getting a tooth pulled expected an OxyContin. And I had my dentist, because I had 4 molar teeth pulled at an older age, he joked to me, he said, sometimes I think people are coming to get their molars pulled out because they want an OxyContin prescription. But now that's changing. And now you have these medical schools and organizations who are doing opioid education de-escalation. Yeah. So you're going to have to take an entrenched belief, like I need to take opioids after orthopedic surgery. And you're finding that now you have patients going to doctors who are saying, no, I'm going to give you Celebrex and Tylenol. And in fact, I'm getting knee replacement surgery at Stanford Hospital soon. And my surgeon there told me that in Europe, orthopedic surgeons don't even prescribe opioids after knee replacement. I was like, are you serious? No, he said that's an American phenomenon. So is this clear that we're just focusing on scientific certainty that's not very well promoted, but would have a major impact on reducing healthcare costs?
Fair enough. That's a great way to sort of end the question. Let me ask you a question. What is a question you'd have for the audience listening in?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I guess, does this approach make sense to people? And I also think that, we are pharma free. We would not accept funding from pharmaceutical companies. That has been suggested. So does it make sense to people listening that we need an alternative way to get this science out? And our way is bringing together medical school faculty, pharmacy school faculty, and medical advertising writers. And of course, the second thing I would ask is, could pharmaceutical companies step back from disease education? Because I personally think that would be really great. I don't think it's realistic, though.
Fair enough. A couple of rapid fire questions for you. What challenges you?
I love what I'm doing. And what challenges me is making the world a better place using this little niched experience and expertise I've developed to improve healthcare and stay in my swimming lane.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And last question, what is the best part of your job?
The best part of my job is learning, like meeting people like John Ioannidis, Jerry Avorn, Jerome Kassir, and also learning something new every day. Like just yesterday, I learned a new term that I've never heard before, which is called de-implementation.
Huh.
And it's sort of the new research term where in the past, people talked about de-prescribing. Now they're using the term de-implementation. So learning new things and contributing to making healthcare better is my greatest joy.
Awesome. I'm going to do a quick recap.
Okay.
During our conversation, we landed up talking about the value of tenacity in your case, where you actually went in and re-followed up with Hippocrates. We talked about your history with Hippocrates. We talked about the pain point they solved, which was drug information at the point of care, which I thought was brilliant even today. We talked a little bit about how it impacted the way doctors prescribe, which is a huge component of how you actually even engage with RX balance, because you're really addressing some of the fundamental problems that exist in the market to sort of address the needs of physicians. You talked a little bit about how what RX balance does impacts health systems and payers, how you've been working with physicians about it. You talked a little bit about the impact, for example, in the case of opioids. We discussed nudging behaviors a little bit, and we talked a lot about the experience around your own experience around Stanford, UC Davis, and the diabetes case study that you discussed. And then you talked a little bit more about the impact of that on drug price. Did I miss anything?
No, that was excellent.
Perfect. For those of you who missed it, just to be clear, nothing in this podcast should be construed as legal or clinical advice of any kind. It's intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. For those of you who missed it, Lydia, where can they find you?
You can email me at Lydia, Lydia, at rxbalance.org.
There you go. And if you like this podcast, please leave a comment, and subscribe. You can find me at DarshanTalks on Twitter, or go to our website at DarshanTalks.com. Lydia, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.